Lately, I've been thinking about all the different ways I've approached gaming over the years. And looking back on it, I've come to realize that we can sometimes be quite relentless when it comes to getting the most out of our experience. Regardless of what our differences are in how we choose to consume our games, at some point or another, I think we've all been hooked into our desires of wanting more. More loot to collect, more milestones to achieve, and of course, more power to acquire. But when that desire to become as powerful as possible gets to a certain point, it begins to damage the lens through which we view and interact with our experiences. And all of a sudden, the game we've been consuming recently loses its magic, that thing that got us addicted to it in the first place. And some of us may wonder if we're doing something wrong, why we're getting bored so easily with our current game, despite doing exactly what we believe the game itself and the surrounding community wants us to do. But it doesn't have to be this way. You'll never be able to fully recover or reimagine that original feeling you had when you booted up your game for the first time. But if you want to get pretty goddamn close, stop seeking power and try nerfing yourself instead. Here's the thing. Most of the fun we have in our games is generated from the Goldilocks rule. If the challenges in front of us are too difficult, then we'll become miserable and quit. But if they're too easy, then we'll become bored and quit. Finding that middle ground is the key to falling in love with a game, whether it's for the first time or for the 100th time. If you try to go full god mode, you'll have fun for a few play sessions, for sure, before putting the game down forever. Because if your primary objective at any given moment is to be as powerful as you possibly can, once you've obtained all that power, what is there left to do, or to see, or to experience? For some of you, this might be exactly what you're seeking. It is, admittedly, a ton of fun while it lasts, even if that enjoyment is fleeting, and maybe you don't care to get anything else out of your games before moving on to something else, and that's totally fine. But for those of you still scratching your heads looking for more, let's see if we can recapture that magic. Let me just start by quickly getting the low-hanging fruit out of the way, because if you've been around the channel at all up until this point, you already know how passionate I am about hardcore. Whether it's World of Warcraft or not, giving yourself one life in any game where there is a chance of death is amazing, and you should give it a try if you haven't already. But I do understand that it may not be everyone's cup of tea. The name of the challenge itself embodies its target audience, I suppose. But if you're looking for a more casual approach, I've always found that forcing myself to go back to the basics is often the best thing I can do for my enjoyment of a game. It's the act of exploring the different ways I can make the simplest of mechanics, items, or spells matter in my playthroughs. And this doesn't just apply to video games either. One of my favorite personal examples is the time I spent with Magic the Gathering back in the day. My fondest memories of my time with Magic goes back to when my buddies and I were all playing each other with intro decks that we picked up at Walmart, along with a few other cards mixed in from the few packs we bought alongside them. This was back when Shards of Alara was the current set, I believe, and I was a big fan of both Esper and Grixis at the time. But little did I know, this would end up being one of my favorite ways to play the game. Years down the road, I would go through a phase of playing with decks that would win on turn 1, or various one-shot combos, or whatever, and it took more away from my experience than what I gained from it. I grew bored of this approach very quickly, and my opponents certainly weren't fond of not being able to play with any of their cards either. But when my buddies and I went back and simply tried removing all of the best cards out of the game, it paved the way for interactions that we had not experienced before, because the games would actually last long enough to see what each deck was all about. I remembered playing through a lot of draft nights as well at my local card shop. It's a format where basic cards that players normally don't care about in a standard competitive setting become far more useful in many different ways, and this is something I think we should try to emulate in our games that we play. As always, let's take World of Warcraft, for example. What would our retail journeys look like if we stopped using heirloom gear or equipment purchased off the auction house? What would our classic playthroughs look like if we stopped using world buffs and the best possible consumables in the game? What if we just simply utilized what fell into our lap as the game progresses, instead of going out of our way to find the best possible upgrade? Especially considering when that upgrade often isn't required to clear the content in front of us. Sometimes going back to the basics is what we need for a fresh experience, and to see the world that we're exploring in a new light. Speaking of which, eliminating fast travel is another big one I've heard a lot of people suggest over the years, and I can confirm that it works great and adds a ton to your journey. It's a big part of why Classic WoW's leveling curve feels so immersive and rewarding, and it's also what breathes life into worlds like Skyrim or Hyrule from Breath of the Wild. Because when you're just starting out in any of these games, you don't have much of a choice. Try to think back and remember what your game was like between the first time you entered the world and the moment you obtained faster traveling options. That playtime was most likely filled with distractions, side quests to complete, NPCs to interact with, and optional areas to explore and immerse yourself in. And that time was probably filled with moments that you're the most nostalgic for, because traveling by foot in any game opens the opportunity to run into something that you didn't expect. It invites us to get lost in the experience, which is not something you can say when you're simply teleporting around the map or flying past everything around you. It's what makes a game like Final Fantasy XIV feel so incredibly small at times, because not only is every zone instanced, but there isn't any physical travel between points that you can fast travel to. You just teleport, and you're there. There's not as much to explore or to spark your curiosity. Or imagine taking carriages to all the major cities in Skyrim as soon as you leave Helgen. How much content are you missing by playing the game in this way? And I would argue the best moments take place between those points of quote-unquote interests. And of course, with the retail version of WoW, fresh accounts end up with skywriting after a few hours. New flight paths have been added all over the place over the years, and we've been given the option of what feels like 12 different Hearthstones to utilize at any given moment. If you're stuck wondering why you can't enjoy leveling anymore, well, this is a big part of it. Removing these conveniences, or simply pretending that they don't exist, will force you to plan out your path more carefully, because where you go and how you get there actually matters a lot more when you do so. It builds a deeper connection with your characters and your journey. And if we want to deepen that connection even further, there's one more thing that we can try on top of all of this, and that is to go into a new game or playthrough completely blind. There are a lot of different ways we can go about this, but to keep it simple, avoiding written guides or videos online will do wonders for our experience. And this is especially true if and when we get stuck and don't know what to do next. There's just something so inherently satisfying about solving a puzzle or coming up with our own combinations and strategies. I feel like it's just how we're built. We need to stop optimizing our game time, whether that's the leveling process or even the end game, whatever that looks like. We are not going to find what makes a game special if all we do is constantly worry about checking the right boxes, because by doing so, our playthrough no longer belongs to us. We're just living through someone else's journey rather than our own. It's our game, our world, and our character. Let's embrace that for a change. Stop trying to become a god and nerf yourself instead. That's it for me today. As always, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.